For as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to perform on stage, whether that be for a play or a musical or something on screen. It's never really worked out for me. Not growing up in a family background that was familiar with performance etiquette and auditioning, there is a lot of things that hindsight is 2020 for. The big thing that comes to mind is back when we had the school musical in middle school and high school, I would go out for it, but they'd always cite my conflict as schedule as a reason they would not let me be involved. Now, back then, even throughout all of high school, I saw, well, what is your schedule? And I would put down what my current schedule is, even though that wouldn't apply if I was cast for the musical. Just for some reason in my brain, if I see what is your schedule, I'm going to put down what I'm currently doing, even if that stuff that I was currently doing at the time would be put aside or become a minor priority status if I were cast in the musical. But no one ever explained that to me back then, so you can imagine when you go out for something over and over again only to face constant rejection for this exact same reasoning, and you try to explain it to the director or you try to cite how other people who are involved with the same stuff as you are still cast in the musical and you're confused by the double standard. It's difficult for a teenager to understand why that might be, why they can accept some conflicts with some people and not others. I think the thing that stung the most for me is my senior year, I didn't put anything down on the schedule because at that point I figured, well, if I'm going to be involved in musical, that means I will have open availability and everything else would be secondary priority. But when I went in to sing the 8 measures or so that we had to prepare, they asked me if I was planning to do cross country again, which I said yes. My freshman year, there was a senior that was involved in musical. It was a rather decent supporting role too, and he was still able to do cross country. He just had to miss practices in a meet or two because he had a conflict with musical. So I didn't think that me saying I was planning to do cross country would cause them to not even consider me at all, because I had seen firsthand how there was someone who was able to do that sport and was still involved in musical. So after that, and after not making the top choir my senior year, I developed a very heavy inferiority complex with my singing voice, which caused my self-esteem to be completely shattered to a point of complete devastation. And what hurt the most about it was the years after. So in the winter time, there is a song that is sung by the top choir, and the alumni from the top choir return for that concert. And I got asked multiple times after I graduated if I was planning to come back and sing Carol of the Bells with the choir, and I'm like, don't you remember? I wasn't in chorale. I'm one of the only people that stayed in town, and, that opportunity just doesn't exist for me. I had absolutely no opportunities in high school. My nerves that I couldn't even feel would constantly get to me, which didn't help. And I became convinced by multiple people in my class that in order to make chorale, you had to take voice lessons. I couldn't afford those, and yet I begged my parents to let me take them so I could do solo and ensemble. And my first year, the voice teacher hardly even had me sing. It was just a giant waste of money just to do solo and ensemble because our choir program made it a rule that if you were going to do it, you had to have voice lessons. And solo and ensemble gave me one of the worst experiences with my teacher ever. Not only did none of them show up both of the years I did it, even when we went to states. That first year, I had what was probably a mild cold and my voice didn't warm up.
So I just felt like I completely failed the performance because my voice was cracking so much during the warm-ups and I was a face full of tears. When I think back on it now, I think the reason my choir teacher threw my score in my face and said, "Well, I guess you just had a nice judge," is because I just showed that I had no confidence in myself. And that's probably why they didn't move me up to the top choir, even though from my freshman year I was told that my voice was too mature and I needed to tone it back because the songs that chorale sang would fit my voice, but the ones that we were singing in treble choir, the tone wouldn't match, and I had to learn how to adjust my voice downwards. But when I was told that I didn't move up because I didn't know how to blend my voice, I really want to say a curse word, but I won't. But it was baloney. I had figured it out at that point. It took me almost 3 years to figure out how to lower the vibrato in my voice and tone it back to sound more poppy. But at that point, my image was already solidified to the directors. There was nothing I could do to change their opinions. So every time winter would roll around and people would come into my work and they'd ask if I was planning to show up for the alumni concert, it just kept triggering these horrible memories in the same way that when people asked me why I didn't sing anymore in the church choir, the reason was I just no longer wanted to sing with a group anymore. It was impossible for me to untether these horrible, unwanted memories and experiences from the act of singing itself at that point. My entire senior year was pure and utter misery. The only reason I didn't quit choir is I'm just not a quitter. In previous years, seniors who didn't move up to the top choir could excuse it as there just not being enough spaces. In my case, I had to see junior upon junior being put in the top choir over me and a few other people. And at that point, you just have to accept that they did not want you, that there is nothing you can do about it. I couldn't even bring myself to go on the New York trip with the rest of the choir. Only juniors and seniors could go to that, and I decided to protest it. It's not like my parents could have afforded it anyway. They would have sacrificed so much to let me go on that, and they thought the only reason I stayed in choir was to go on the trip. No, the only reason I stayed is because I'm stubborn, and that stubbornness caused me to have this deep-seated trauma that, as you can see even today, I can't talk about without breaking into tears. I've tried recording this video so many times, and every single time I cannot get through explaining the background without breaking into tears.
The moral of the story, even though it leaves a lot of what happened out, is at the end of the day, a lot of this was self-inflicted. Whether it be due to my social incompetence of not understanding the scheduling stuff, or not really understanding that when the director was talking about the other people singing, that didn't necessarily apply to me when it came to my more mature tone of voice. Other people needed a more mature tone, whereas I had to learn to tone it back a bit. Hindsight, they do say, is 20/20, and in this case, I can confidently say that even though a lot of this stuff sucked for me, a majority of it was self-inflicted, and it takes a long time and a lot of self-reflection to understand it. But at the same time, that does not mean that my trauma isn't very real. So the purpose of this video is documenting how I am taking conscious steps to overcome this chapter in my life, recounting a number of the frustrations, and sharing the lessons that I have learned and will be taking steps to apply in the future. Earlier this year, I decided to join a community choir. Now, I can't get into the details of what the catalyst was for me to start looking at community choirs and looking to sing again. But the very long story short is I felt like my trauma got worn as someone else's personality, and it hurt me so bad that it made me realize that I wasn't going to get over this trauma unless I actually took concrete steps forward into conquering this beast that completely destroyed me for about a decade now. And I'm only sharing this much of the catalyst to explain how devastating it was to me psychologically. Please do not condemn the unnamed individual that triggered this, because everyone has their own demons and their own fights. And when people go through their own identity crisis, they start reinterpreting the past, and they can confuse elements that they have heard from their friends and people they care about, and they'll start to internalize them, which is what seems to have occurred here, in which other people's memories suddenly became their own memories, and you had trauma mixing with trauma, basically. At the end of the day, what was a horrifying and uncomfortable experience was the wake-up call that I needed, but not necessarily wanted. Out of heartbroken spite, I ended up looking at choirs in my area and discovered one that was very close by. So I reached out to them, and I assumed that they weren't going to allow me to join their spring session because they were already 3 weeks into it at the time. But when they got back to me on email, they invited me to join them that week. And that is when a lot of things in my life started to change. I had not expected them to invite me to their current session, and the issue with that was at the time I was still working the closing shift. I don't know if I mentioned it in my original update video, but I had been promised for 3 years that they would move me to a morning shift, and they kept putting it off over and over and over again. And the entire time, people who were hired in after me, often to be my replacements, would mysteriously end up in those very shifts that I kept asking to be in, whether it be the 9 to 6 shift, the 7 to 4 shift, or the 5 to 2 shift. I really needed off 1 to 10 because my circadian rhythm is naturally predispositioned to be waking up very early in the morning, and after working for I think 8 years at that point, working only the evening shift, and back when I worked at my other job, sometimes that was until 2 a.m., it completely messed up my health, and I am still recovering from it to this day. And it just so happened that they moved yet another person to the opening shift. And what really stung this time was this was someone who I had defended because management and some of my other coworkers were getting on him for his laziness, when in the examples that they were getting on him for was a result of his OCD that wasn't being catered to properly. Now, there were plenty of other things they could have writ him up for, but I defended him, and as a result, he ended pushing management's buttons to a point where they just started caving to anything he said, because then they became afraid of being ableist because of how I was explaining things. So they ended up putting him in the schedule that, again, they were working to get me into. And I feel so bad even admitting that this was the trigger, because I want people to have their needs catered to. The problem is, this wasn't the need that needed to be catered to. They needed to make sure that all of the supplies to be able to do the job were laid out for this guy, so he didn't go wandering off trying to find them and then finding every reason in the book that he couldn't do the job because he didn't have a very specific thing. But no, mysteriously, when I was venting to all of my coworkers a couple weeks prior to why I still haven't moved off of the closing shift, because he was one of the closers with me, and he's like, oh, so I'm going to be working with you. And I'm like, well, no, I should be moving down to an earlier position because this shift is really wearing me out. Mysteriously, he somehow needs to be in the earlier shift. Again, I feel very bad that this is the thing that broke me, because I'm not going to sit here and say for sure that this wasn't a need for him, but it wasn't the need he expressed to anyone. So it felt personal in the moment. What kept happening was, while I was waiting patiently and not trying to overwhelm my manager, who was having a lot of anxiety over people's schedules and trying to allocate everyone's needs and desires, people would then take advantage of his nature and manipulate the situation to their favor. And I put up with this for a long time because in my mind I kept saying, so long as other people are happy, I'm happy. If I'm patient, it'll eventually all work out. And I had to learn the hard way that when you need something and you are being neglected in this way, you have to put your foot down. There is a time for patience and there is a time for action. And at this point, it was clear that it didn't matter how many candy bars my manager bought me. It didn't matter how many words of appreciation the store would give me for my willingness to be in that closing shift and how I would quote unquote be saving the team. Work was killing me. If you've seen my community post recently, I mentioned that I'm still having problems with my hand. And this started a bit before the pandemic, but got worse when I was working the front door and we were sanitizing carts. We all pretty much develop some form of repetitive strain injury, and in my case it was on top of what I was already experiencing from drawing for long periods back when I created Destination Unknown. And ever since I moved into this new position, I've been lifting a bunch of heavy items by myself, some of which I really should not be lifting by myself, but in my case, I see heavy item, I'm going to lift heavy item, whether it hurts or not. And as a result, my hand might be permanently damaged. Now, I have had an x-ray done on it a couple times now. They don't know what's going on with it. I assume it is something in the nerve endings that flares up after it's been used too much. But what is currently going on is between my pinky and my ring finger, I have a ton of tension in the joint area that will radiate down the side of my hand. If I continue drawing with it for about 20 minutes after it starts flaring up, my hand is like out of commission to draw for the next week or two. It's very bad. And this specific injury started up when I started having rheumatoid arthritis scares. It originally started out as I'd feel the pain and I'd look down and my knuckles are all red and inflamed and my joints became very stiff, a bit hard to bend. But the pain wasn't this intense. Like, I didn't have to put my pen down and stop working for weeks on end just to recover. It was just like a mild pain that was associated with inflammation, and it was annoying. But every time I would make an appointment and they'd test my blood for a rheumatoid factor or investigate it for a repetitive strain injury, it would come up negative because the US healthcare system, it takes like 6 to 8 weeks to get an appointment. And by that time, whatever was flaring up went away by the time they do the tests. But circling back, work was injuring me, and part of the problem was my sleep schedule was so out of whack that my immune system was very vulnerable. I've caught COVID, I think, 5 times now, possibly 6, but the time that I believe I got Omicron was back when that variant first surged up, and I was so miserable and bedridden that going in for a drive-through test that was like a 3-hour wait, I couldn't do it. I was that miserable. But yeah, I do believe that my lack of sleep has caused my immune system to become very vulnerable. And I had used this argument over a year prior to them when I had to temporarily move down to 4 days a week because I had long COVID at that point, and that extra day was too much on my body. I developed plantar fasciitis because my heels weren't healing fast enough, and at the time they had a no sitting policy, and that's a funny story. So just as people kept moving down in position to earlier shifts that, again, I was promised before I even moved into this new department, people now sit down at work. I had to keep standing on that concrete without a pad to stand on until it caused me to develop plantar fasciitis, and they didn't take me seriously until I refused to keep standing and told them, look, I can't keep doing this. The same people a lot of the department has problems with, and the same people who kept moving down in positions because management didn't want to deal with their bullcrap anymore. All while it was screwing me over and screwing other people over, because I'm not the only person this happened to. I'm just the person it happened to the longest because no one wanted to work the closing shift. And I know no one wanted to work the closing shift, which is why I was willing to be patient. So I'll ask the void this. If you were in my position and you have waited 3 years to have a change and this is how you are treated, what would you do? How would you feel? Because to me, I had no life. Because my sleep schedule was so out of whack, I pretty much only just woke up, got food, went to work, got home, but there was nothing open because at that point everything is closed because it's so late, and I had no option but to sleep. I would try to draw, but the evening hours don't really work the best for my creativity because my brain is just dead at that point. And this was how my life was pretty much since the pandemic started. I couldn't partake with any of the extra activities my coworkers did because they did that all while I was at work, and I suddenly had a conflict where if I wanted to join this choir, I had to make work cater to this specific need. Some other background here is I had been trying to go to karaoke for months at this point when I discovered that there was a place that hosted it. But once again, it conflicted with my work schedule. And by the time I got out, karaoke was done, and I was waiting, and I kept telling them, I'm like, please, I want to do something fun after work. I can't even hang out with my family. My family goes out to eat with my brother, and they do stuff with him because it's available, whereas the only time I can really talk to my family is if I sacrifice my lunch to do so. And I have no ability to do anything fun in my life because my entire life is work. And the past few years, work has taken the priority, and I haven't been able to do anything creative or fun because it's basically killing me. The physical symptoms aside, my mental health was tanking at this point because I defend so many people. The worst of the worst, the people everyone outcasts, the people I personally may have some very strong opinions about, and yet they end up in positions that were promised to me, and when I talk about it, it's always, oh well, they suddenly have this conflict in schedule. So, I had a conflict now. I was not going to join this choir if I continued waiting patiently, because the impulse that was partially fueled by spite would leave me because I would gain some mental clarity and I'd feel bad for having the motivating factor being that I was heavily triggered in such a very bizarre way, and I would just forget about it altogether, and I knew I couldn't let that happen. So, I told them, I am flexible, but I need to have my schedule adjusted on Mondays so I could attend choir. I am willing to wait even longer to move to an earlier shift, but I must have those Mondays as an earlier shift or to have it off. Now, the only problem there is apparently that day I decided to put my foot down. My own brother had asked for his schedule to be adjusted, and now he wasn't working on those very days that I needed adjusted because I told choir that I would be there, and the one time I asked work for an immediate change because I decided to put my own mental well-being first, I am suddenly the antagonist. And just as I was trying to reconcile the fact and be happy for my brother, because in his case, he had kids to take care of, it was understandable. Then I learned about that other coworker I defended, and that day, they also gave him a schedule adjustment on those very days I needed, and I lost it. I lost it so bad, I went home because just like with choir and it being physically triggering for me to be in the choir classroom or to even sing afterwards because I kept getting reminded that I never ended up in the top choir every year, being at work after being told no to something I have never asked for before in my entire 7 years of working with this company, while my own brother got it and someone who people in the department really didn't like, but I was still defending because you can't be ableist. They were able to move despite not working there very long, and I'm the bad guy. I'm the bad guy for even wanting to do something with my life. That is a common pattern with me. People become complacent about what I can offer them. In this case, it was the fact that I was willing and able to work a shift no one wanted to work, and they became overly dependent on my hard work and my ability to keep the department functioning even when we were in low staff, that they didn't want to lose me in that position. And I understood it. I was willing to be flexible, but they said no. And what made this worse is while my brother and this coworker didn't know about the choir thing because that was impulsive, and if anyone knows me, I am not an impulsive person. I am someone that usually sits back for way too long weighing the pros and cons of a situation. But everyone knew I have been getting screwed over for years, and yet not once was someone willing to sacrifice, even for a brief while, their own wants, because for most people this was not a need, it was just a want. No one was willing to sacrifice their own desires for my need, while this entire time I had been sacrificing my need for other people's desires. And sometimes breaking down is the only way to have people take you seriously. I don't think anyone really understood just how miserable I was, because I always try to look at the bright side of every situation. Whenever something sucks for me, I always look at, well, what is this benefiting for other people? So I don't hold this against anyone. It's just that it hurts. And it hurts to recognize that you can do everything in your power to help others, but people are very selfish. I myself, I have my own things that I am selfish about. And I will say it was a bit selfish for me to ask for something that impulsively. I've critiqued people in the past for doing this to management because I find it to be very unempathetic. So in some ways, I was being judged in the way that I was judging other people in the past. But it was through having a full-on meltdown, going home, and did they finally move me into a position. And I am so much happier now. But anyway, long tangent aside, I'm sorry for going on for that for so long, but that is the background, and that has what's been going on with me for the past few years. All of that was needed to explain how difficult it was for me to even start healing from this deep-seated trauma with my singing voice. It wasn't enough to have the motivation to look into singing again. It wasn't enough to find a choir. I had to share my entire heart with work in a very uncomfortable way just for them to see how much I loved my job, how much I loved my coworkers, and how much I was willing to suffer before they realized that if they weren't going to do something about this, I was going to quit. Full, blunt, emotional honesty is sometimes the only way forward. To say I would remain happy if other people kept moving when I didn't would be a lie. I had reached my limit, and luckily work was willing to work it out with me. And with my new schedule, I was able to start healing from this very deeply ingrained trauma on my singing voice and my self-worth. Now, the first thing I really liked about this new choir that I joined is they were accepting of everyone, regardless if you had a musical background or not. In fact, this current season, they are doing a sight reading class for people who don't know how to read music about half an hour before it starts, which I think is amazing. And that gets into the second thing that I really liked about this group, and that is that they embody the true love of your fellow human being. Because I didn't just discover a choir with a common interest in singing, I discovered a whole network of volunteer opportunities and charity work, all fueled by the love and desire for other people and the different causes each person in the choir is passionate about. I'm not going to speak too much on my honest thoughts with a lot of charity that I've seen in the past, but in the past I kind of got burned by a charity that would pop up every year in front of my work that was Christian and offered resources for homeless people to get their life back together. But after a couple years, I ended up doing some research on them, and it turns out for people to keep using their services, they had to make a testament of faith, which I completely disagreed with. And I have to restrain myself from donating to them when I see them there when they pop up every year. Because it's enticing. They use actual artists to sell their stuff so they can raise money for their charity. And I love that about them. I think it is a good cause. I just do not agree that the charity's intentions are truly coming from an authentic love of God. When you put someone into a position that they have to submit to a specific belief system, whether that belief system is real or not, I would argue, and again, this is my own personal belief on the matter, that when someone does this, they are putting themselves in the position of God. And that is what gives me the ick when it comes to charities that end up doing this. But I think what helped in the case with this choir that I joined is since it's community driven and local, it's not prone to the same level of corruption and control that some larger charity organizations sometimes get into. Because first and foremost, there is the charity that goes directly to the choir that would be based on people's time and commitment to trying to raise money to keep the choir functioning. And then there's the charity people find through talking to people within the choir and collaborating with themselves and other people in the community outside of the choir. I guess I've been stuck online for a long time that I'm sure this is a normal thing, but for someone who's been chronically online like myself, just doom scrolling and seeing the worst of the worst while also having some interesting experiences with charity, that seeing it with my own eyes, the raw passion people have just so another human being can live a better life on this earth, I think that's lovely. Anyway, it was through this choir earlier in the year that I was able to conquer one of the issues that I have had, and that was I was able to acquire a solo in my head voice. Back in high school, whenever I tried to sing in my head voice alone, it was like I could barely sing, and it was mostly just a light breath of air that would escape my mouth. And I don't think I properly explained it earlier, but when I say I don't feel nerves, I mean there's no negative thoughts, sweaty hams, tightness in my chest, butterflies in my stomach, the typical stuff that people explain. They aren't there. I only know I am being affected by nerves when I go up to sing and nothing comes out. Now, recently there has been a phenomenon where I can't feel the tips of my hands and they have started to shake, but that's the only physical sign that is relatable and it didn't used to exist previously. Anyway, landing that solo was the confidence booster I needed to get back on my feet. So much so that on the concert night for the choir, one of the people who helps run the choir's organizational stuff behind the scenes approached me and asked if I was interested in joining an ensemble for a musical she was in. And I went, "Oh yes, I've always wanted to be involved in a musical, but my school never wanted me, so I've never really tried to audition for anything outside of school." And that's how I ended up being a postulant in The Sound of Music, which was a very, very fitting role for myself. A very niche fact about me is I used to consider becoming a nun. So being a postulant in a musical was a very fitting role for me to be in. I still sometimes question if that's the path I should go down sometimes, but that's not where I'm supposed to be. And I wasn't really familiar with The Sound of Music. I had seen it in my childhood on TV, but it was so long and felt boring to me that I never really paid attention to it. All I really knew about it was doe, a deer, a female deer. And then, "You are 16, going on 17, baby. It's time to think." But man, even though the nun ensemble doesn't sing so much in this musical, a majority of their songs are in a cappella and in Latin. That is one heck of a first musical to be involved in. And not only that, the choral director also made me sing parts by myself. Like, I went from being at the bottom of the social ladder in high school when it came to choir and stuff to it's my first time being involved in a musical of any sorts. And people are wanting to talk to me because they like my voice, and they assume that I also have a ton of experience with stuff, so they're giving me more responsibilities, all while I'm sitting here like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Because I really don't. I've never danced before. I've never sang while moving. I don't know what stage left and stage right is. I don't know all these different terminologies the director is using. And I was thrown into this, I believe, on the second week of vocals and maybe the first week of blocking. In fact, I showed up like half an hour late to blocking because I didn't realize the schedule was different than the week beforehand when we were doing just vocals. And we were off book too. It was crazy. It was a massive learning curve, and I loved every part of it. I also learned how loving and supporting the musical theater community is, which was vastly different from what I experienced in high school, where it seemed more prestigious and prissy. In fact, I realized that my whole issue with rejection and self-image issues wasn't as unique as I thought it was in the musical theater culture. I think back at my high school, a lot of people masked it, and there were also a lot of people who were going into theater professionally, so they had a better handle on their nerves and their true thoughts that might have been going on deep down. So one of the nights, I think it was during Tech Week. I overheard a group of people discussing a recent audition that was going on that day, that people who went were completely blown away by the level of dance that was required for the audition and how insane it was. And it was making them nervous on even going out for the audition, even though they were preparing for it. So I walked up to them and asked about it, and they all seemed to collectively shy away from it. They all had this mentality that it seemed pointless to even try, so they just weren't going to go. So then I went, I didn't actually audition for Sound of Music. I've never auditioned for community theater. Now, I left out the part that I had auditioned for high school musicals, but I don't even count that, because for high school all I did was walk in and sing like 8 measures and then left, whereas from what I understand now from the 2 auditions I have gone to, it is you sing, you dance, and then you read lines. So I told them that if I could go in there and have no idea what I'm doing, they had no excuses, since they are the ones who have been preparing for that audition and they both clearly wanted the role they were going out for. But it was also in this moment I was able to realize, hey, I think these things affect everyone. Just for me, it affects me in a way that just isn't relatable in the same way that it is to most people. So I went to this audition and it was hell on earth. I have never danced before, and this was a very fast hip-hop style dance. It was so difficult to follow along, and my muscles, they were being worked in a way I don't think they've ever been worked in my life. I don't think my muscles have felt pain and building muscle in those places. It was very different from Taekwondo, but it was so much fun, and it made me want to audition for more things in the future. Now, none of us ended up cast in that musical. It was very, very small. There were only like 6 roles and over like 50 people going out for them, but it was a good first experience with an actual audition. Which brings me to the current story of the video. Now, I'm going to flash back to around May. So I was a couple weeks into the new Sound of Music production I was involved in, and I was telling God how thankful I was to be involved in this, since I know He had been putting a bunch of opportunities in my face over the years, and I kept denying them due to my own insecurities. I can't remember if I mentioned this in the initial update video, but I was offered multiple times by a priest to be one of the paid cantors at church, and I was too nervous to go up there because I kind of felt like, I don't even know, because it wasn't that I felt like I was a bad singer at this time. It was more that I didn't want to get up there, because every time I went up on stage or I tried to perform my voice without other people there, like a physical solo, my voice just wouldn't work despite feeling completely fine on the inside. Like, it's just a blank nothingness. That's how I usually am. There's nothing else going on. So I never took it, and unfortunately he ended up involved in a scandal as I was working up the courage to ask him about it again. And it's one of those things where I say I don't live life with regrets. I do look back at this with a lot of regret, because I could have made a living singing. I could have been doing wedding venues and funerals, as well as working for the church at the time, and I would have been fine making income that way. So it's one of those missed opportunities. But as soon as I got out of this very abusive situation with work, I was able to end up in a position that God was able to use to help me heal from this trauma that I have been carrying for years. So He tells me, I'm very glad that you took this opportunity when it was given to you. the next musical you're going to be involved in is Frozen. And I went, oh, I love Frozen. I have never seen the Broadway version, but Frozen was a very pivotal movie for how I ended up shaping Destination Unknown. Back before Frozen, the elemental system was more like Pokemon, since it originally stemmed from a Pokemon fan fiction. But after seeing Frozen, that's more when I got the idea to start phasing the story into only select people having powers. And when I think about it now, I think Lozakuran's original story before he changed a lot with his character was very inspired by Elsa, though I don't think that was intentional, because I don't recall ever thinking about Elsa for anything with him. None of his songs are even related to Elsa. But when I think about what Lozakuran's original story was, he ended up causing the area surrounding the mountains of Mediterranean to end up in a winter because he was so angry. He had so much hatred for his mom that it made his heart as cold as ice and it just froze everything. Back then, he had storm powers, and how they would manifest was based on his emotions. But now he just controls lightning, though the mechanic with his lightning is still based on the emotional side of things. Though now with Lozakuran, his emotions are projected outside. One of the only people who can read them, like, physically in the flesh is Komogi. And that's one of the jokes upon meeting them is Lozakuran projects his emotions outwardly in the spirit, so he's convinced he doesn't have any. No, he does. He just, like, can't feel them because he kind of refuses to acknowledge them. So the spirits can see them, and Komogi can see them even more because he has the gift to see auras. It's one of my favorite parts of the story, but not for what you think. It's because it's the only time I can think of Lily breaks out into full-on laughter of amusement. And Lozakuran is the only one at this time who could hear and see Lily. So he's side-eyeing her while she's laughing at the fact that Lozakuran is saying a whole bunch of lies that he believes. And Komogi sees that none of it is true because he's reading the colors that are all around him. And through this confusion, Komogi and Kora end up dragging Lozakuran away against his will, all because he was so confused by Lily's laughter and Komogi's Komoginess. The line that... I have it on Art Fight. The line that Lozakuran says to Komogi when Komogi approaches him is, "I can kill you in multiple different ways." And Komogi fully believes that is true, but because he can see the intentions and the true emotions that Lozakuran has, he knows that he's not a threat, and it's just this is what I can do, leave me alone. And Komogi's not going to have it because Lozakuran is all alone. They need another person for their team, so he ends up dragging him into a conversation, and that's when Lily realizes that Komogi can read auras, and she starts bursting out in laughter. Then after this is all settled and done, Lozakuran is in his room later, and Lily pops out, and she starts laughing at him again. And Lozakuran's like, "What is so funny? You've been doing that all day." And she explains to him what is going on, and he starts freaking out, and he's like, "What do you mean I have emotions? You're telling me the spirits have been seeing things I personally can't see, and this entire time, what I thought to be true, the spirits are laughing at me because I'm making a fool out of myself?" And Lily says, yeah, basically, that's what's going on. Komogi's just a more direct line of exposing that fact. So thus begins the Los avoiding Komogi arc. So that part of the story is where Komogi is trying to cheer Oxtapia up after her brother was killed. But there's like weird politics going on in Comaris due to the monarchy and then trying to integrate those who were on Frekutan back into Comaris because they see them as traitors. This therefore makes it so that Komogi can't really talk to Oxtapia because she's royalty and she's in her room, and Komogi's not allowed back there because he's a peasant basically. Which actually, it's kind of funny recalling this portion of the story because now that I think about it, with Frozen, Frozen, Anna's trying to speak to Elsa for years, but Elsa's trapped in her room out of fear, which is kind of similar to what Oxapia's doing. She's too afraid to socialize because she is so down because her twin, her other half basically, is just gone and she can't cope with it and she is shutting everyone out. But anyway, my tangent aside, I was very happy to be told, ooh, Frozen. Now there was just one problem back in May that I wasn't even aware of until September. Apparently Frozen's rights were not even released to community theater until literally the end of August or September. It had to be kept under wraps until very recently what show they were doing because it was so new. But back then I didn't even question it. I'm like, you say it's gonna be Frozen, it's going to be Frozen. And it's super funny because I'm someone who doesn't necessarily trust what I hear in the spirit right away. This is one of the few times where I went, I totally believe that because I don't trust it's from God. Oftentimes it's either my own mind or it's some other spirit trying to convince me of something. This one I'm like, oh yes, Frozen. I have no doubts in my mind whatsoever. And this is gonna sound funny. I didn't even realize there was a Broadway version for it. So early last month, I saw that the theater was going to be doing Frozen, and I went, huh. You know, I wasn't expecting them to do a winter musical. They said they weren't sure if they were going to be able to get enough people in the cast to even do one. But it was, well, okay then. Not only does that confirm what I heard months ago, that's also apparently something that I should not have believed in given what they are saying, because the rights weren't even available to them until literally right then. It was very surreal is a good way to describe it. But when I was briefly looking up the Broadway version, I got really excited. Remember, I was in the nun ensemble for Sound of Music. But one of the sad things about that show is there aren't many scenes for the ensemble. There were very, very few moments in which we could be on stage. But with Frozen, the ensemble is in so many scenes with so many different styles of song, and there's a lot of dancing. So I was really excited because I wasn't too sure if I'd be comfortable doing a larger speaking role, but there were a number of roles that are minor and then the character ends up in the ensemble later that I'm like, hey, that seems like it'd be a good first experience on stage outside of the ensemble. So I went in and said, I'm trying out for everything because, yay. I don't know anything about auditions. I still don't. So I guess it never really dawned on me that you're supposed to go out for a very specific role. But anyway, I said I auditioned for everything, but unfortunately, those pesky little nerves that I can't feel still ended up getting to me. Now, it did go better than in years past. I was able to sing some of the notes rather well in my head voice, which is better than nothing at all. So even though I still was getting really heavily affected by those pesky little nerves I can't feel, it was still an accomplishment for me. It's improvement. And I was also talking to the other auditioners afterwards. Now, when I first walked into the audition, no one was talking to each other. That quickly changed as soon as some of the people from Sound of Music recognized each other, and I pretty much just became the center of conversation. It's so funny because I'm not really all that social of a person. I tend to just do my own thing in the corner. But we ended up talking about how everyone was nervous and afraid to mess up, and it was helping me understand that a lot of the nerves that I personally experience, even if it's not relatable in the same way as it is to others, these people are going out with very real emotions that are affecting their body in a way that they can't control either. And it was slowly starting to shift my perspective on what I felt like has been a curse my entire life. there was a new face that walked in as we were in the middle of conversation, and she was going to sing the same song that I prepared, but she was talking about how she was nervous because she hasn't done musical theater in 20 years and only recently got back into it this previous year with a different theater where she was in the ensemble for. So, me and the other people who were in Sound of Music were trying to pump her up and encouraging her how nice the director was and that she'd do great. And since she was singing the same song that I kind of butchered with my nerves, I'm like, you need to reclaim the song. The song deserves better. You got this. And she ended up coming out of the audition room saying it went very well. So we were all very happy for her. And this was something that I really liked about the atmosphere at auditions. I think most people don't tend to talk all that loudly, if at all, because that was my experience at the other audition when I was trying to encourage the other two people who were having nerves about it. But it was fun to see how a small little conversation that started as people recognizing each other from the previous musical the theater put on involved other people and welcoming them into our little found family of community theater, and we started to bond over the awkward experience that is auditioning. Now, we ended up having to do 2 dances for the dance portion of the audition, and both of them were kind of wild. I will say that dance is probably the biggest thing that I have to work on for the future when it comes to auditioning again. Then after that, we read lines for the characters we were auditioning for. And I thought that this was something I would have no problem with. But the problem is, I've never actually looked at a production script before, so I was not familiar with the format, and I got really confused. When I read for Anna and Elsa, it went all right. Like, I was still struggling to figure out what was actually my line. But I felt that when I was speaking, I was able to give a convincing performance. But then I read for Olaf. Because I now work such an early shift at work, my bedtime is no later than 8:30. It was nearly 10 o'clock by the time we started reading for Olaf, and my brain was already struggling to understand the format of production scripts. I ended up walking off when I was reading for Olaf because I have no excuses. That is what I say. I have no excuses, but this is what was going on. The last line that I had to read was like this full-on paragraph, and suddenly something clicked. If you have spoken to me in direct messages, you have probably noted that I speak in paragraphs. I feel a need to constantly over-explain myself because people misunderstand me or they take my logic out of context, so I am constantly trying to make it as clear as possible, which unfortunately ends up as a word salad. And I'm reading this and going, wow, I'm way too tired. I can't read the words on the page. This must be how everyone feels when they read my messages. So I told the director I'm good and walked off without reading the final paragraph, which was fine. And then as I left the audition, that's when I heard in my spirit, well, why didn't you ask for help? And I'm like, huh? Like, why didn't you call out to me to help read that? And I went, well, you know, God, that just did not dawn on me. And this is the lesson that I really wanted to share because it was extremely powerful. He said, because you believed you couldn't read it because you were too tired, your mind created an idol in the moment, and you gave your belief into the fact that you wouldn't be able to read it. So you walked off. You didn't finish your work. And I went, wow, that's kind of harsh. Wow, that's kind of weighing on me now. Because then I started thinking, that showed the director that I was nervous to the point that I couldn't finish the line. Like, what would I do on stage? And then right as I was thinking that, God went, I'm not condemning you for this, but we're using this as a teaching moment. What the director saw back there, she was disappointed. She wanted to see you overcome that, see what you were gonna do on that ridiculous line, because it is a very funny line, and they weren't expecting you to do that. And I went, oh, I totally just killed my chances there. And he went, no, you're going to get a callback, but you need to understand that anything that you put your belief in, whether that be positive or negative, is an idol, and it's an idol in your own mind in this case. In that moment, you believed you couldn't continue reading that line because you were tired and you had already messed up reading it beforehand. That gave wiggle room for other entities to sabotage what was going on. Therefore, removing your connection from me, and you not realizing that if you had just asked, you would have been able to read those lines clearly. And I went, that makes sense, but now I just feel bad because I'm not trying to create an idol in my mind. I'm not trying to serve two masters. And this was the bombshell that blew my mind. He went, so you talk a lot about Romans 1 and how a lot of people quote it out of context without bringing in the second part of Romans. And I went, yeah, because Paul's letter to the Romans is luring them into a trap with them agreeing with his logic before he calls them out with being hypocritical. And then he went, do you understand that when people talk about the reprobate mind, it's in that chapter and taken out of context? And I went, no, isn't that in Romans 8? And he goes, no, it's in Romans 1. So I ended up looking it up, and yes, apparently it was from Romans 1. I don't know why I thought it was later in the letter. I said, so what are you saying with that? And he goes, that's what the debased mind is. It is the natural state in which you give your belief into anything that is not him. And this might be a shocking thing to say, but a light bulb went off in my mind in this moment, and I went, oh my stars, we're all reprobates. I can't believe I never once noticed that. I've never really honed in on this scripture too much. Whenever people have brought it up to me, it's always been from other Christians who try to describe the sin of other people and why they're like, oh, those people, they're bad because they've been given up to their own heart's desires. And that's what happens when you sin and you refuse to submit to God. And I've always just wondered why they fixated on it. But I didn't even realize that it was in the first chapter of Romans, despite my own fixation always being on the fact that people don't read Romans as one whole letter. They often just cherry pick portions of the letter to fit their specific agenda, whether it be liberal Christianity or conservative Christianity. The letter to the Romans is one that is extremely misunderstood, and it frustrates me that people always cite it as in aha, and then they don't look at the context surrounding the verses. But lo and behold, that verse, it was just translated differently in my own personal Bible, that I didn't realize that the word debased was used there. So when people were using the reprobate mind on Reddit, I thought they were citing something different. But this completely changed my perspective on just about everything. And, you know, most people, when they would get told something this harsh, it might upset them. But for me, I went, oh, this makes so much sense. So the fact that if we believe we are incapable of something, no matter what it might be, then we are incapable, because that's what we believe in. That incapability is the idol, and it blew my mind. So I went, well, okay, if that's true, then why do I still get affected by nerves? I don't believe I feel them, so why do they still affect me? And then I was reminded that I acknowledged the fact that I don't feel nerves, yet they affect me right before I went into that audition. That was a gateway, whether you want to call it a spirit or a state of mind psychologically, to access that part of my brain and self-sabotage. At that point, I am allowing that thought to manifest itself because I'm giving the thought of nerves power, but I don't feel nerves in the way other people describe it because I have always trusted God to protect me spiritually. Even though I don't trust what I hear in my mind, it's a form of I don't feel nerves because every single time other people have thrown in other manners of protection, I've said no to it, which has caused a bit of a shell, so I don't feel those negative things hardly at all anymore unless it's extremely strong. So then I had to ask, if we're all reprobates, how do we fix that? And then he said, that's why you continue to sin. No matter what you do to refine it, those thoughts will always manifest themselves, even if it's only brief. You can have an idol for a very brief moment and it is still an idol. But that doesn't mean I completely remove myself from you. It's just that you, in that moment, forget that I am there to supply you the ability to overcome that obstacle. The Romans are being hypocritical because they're judging people for the plank in their eye without acknowledging the plank in theirs, because everyone is a reprobate. The whole point is to acknowledge when something manifests itself for what it is and to find a way to systematically untether yourself from that belief. So now it has me thinking, so how do I get rid of these nerves I can't feel because I can't feel them? So I started asking, well then, can you let me feel the nerves? And the response was, I just revealed to you that the whole reason you do not experience nerves in the same way others do is a form of heightened spiritual protection, and now you are asking for it to be removed. At this point, I need to make a shirt solely for myself that says, I unintentionally insult God on a daily basis, and he still cares. I've never understood why people are so afraid to question God. The response I always get is people just go, well, I trust that God's ways are higher than my own, but when I question God, that's not me saying that my own understanding is above his. It's that I want my understanding to match God's. I want to understand how God thinks. So therefore, if I don't understand something, I'm going to ask for that knowledge. And in this case, the knowledge I was seeking was first and foremost, how do I delete this idol that is apparently in my mind that I believe that I call nerves? And then I was told just how challenging it is for people to get up there and conquer these very real emotions that they are experiencing. That even though I have faced a lot of rejection in my life that has caused me to develop these insecurities and nerves and self-sabotage, it is so much harder for a lot of other people because they don't have the same level of protection in the way I do. So I need to change my mentality from viewing these nerves I can't chemically feel as a curse to seeing the blessing that I do have because I rely on God for spiritual protection to not experience these very uncomfortable emotions, and instead focus on lifting up others who experience those very real emotions and get affected in the same way, but they are overcoming even without that sort of spiritual protection. So I have no more excuses to be blaming the idol in my mind for things. And after thinking about it for the past week since I was told this in my spirit, I believe what that idol that's been causing these nerves all these years is the fear of failure. I have been rejected so much in my life that even though I keep trying to see the positive side in everything, that sort of quote-unquote demon is what keeps popping up over and over again. I just don't feel it, and when it does pop up, it sabotages everything, and I don't understand what's happening because it is a self-protection mechanism. It is a way for me to not feel guilty for failing. So it causes the failure for me, basically. All I have to do is get rid of this frickin' mentality. But it's easier said than done. Because I went, well, God, you're God, so remove the idol. You can remove the idol. And he said, what that removes your free will. You have to choose to get rid of that idol in your mind. And I went, yeah, that is something I already know. That's something I've told people over and over and over again, that they need to stop believing the lies their mind is telling them. One lie I had to remove from myself back in April was when memories of my best friend from middle school surfaced. Alongside that, God revealed that there was an idol in my mind that had convinced me that I would never find a friendship of the same level ever again. And when I say that this thought in my mind, when reality hit and God told me I had to get rid of it, I felt like I was dying. There's no other way to describe it. I ended up texting Winter and freaking out about it because I couldn't do it. I logically knew what he was asking me, and I'm like, I'm being told to fully remove a memory from my mind because it is an idol somehow. And the realization of this was so devastating at the time, but it's so difficult for me to recall it because when I was finally able to let go of this very real core belief that I had, the weight was lifted off my shoulders and I couldn't even remember her name for a solid 2 weeks because when it was taken away, any desire for that thought to return was also removed from me. So I can't really accurately recall the very real distress I was in that night. Aside from it took me multiple hours and then having to talk it through with Winter to fully remove that mentality from my mind. Because if I didn't get rid of it in that moment, it would have kept growing and it would have just kept sabotaging my relationships. So I know better and I know exactly what I'm being told when it comes to these nerves in particular. It's one of those cases though where even though I've been logically told what this is, because I haven't had that full realization of horror, basically, I know that idol is still in there, and the only way to get rid of it is to dismantle this perfectionism and the fear of failure. That is the only way, but until that moment of horror strikes me, it's going to remain. Not because I believe in it, but because I know from experience now what removing an idol from your mind feels like. And it's not something that is an easy process. It is very difficult, and the longer you have held on to a core belief, and the longer you keep holding on to a core belief, the harder it is to get rid of. With the false idol of friendship, the reason I was able to get rid of that the night it was revealed to me is not only have I talked it out with multiple people before, the belief wasn't exclusive to a specific situation, whereas this fear of failure is very specific to singing or performance in general. So the only way to conquer it is to keep putting myself in those situations and not giving those negative thoughts power. Which is kind of weird to say because when it came to nerves for me, I would feel physically fine. There was no rapid heart rate, no tightness in my chest, no butterflies in my stomach, no racing negative thoughts. But apparently, that's not how it manifests for me. What God is telling me is it stems from a subconscious belief, and that's why I don't feel them in the same way. A lot of people's nerves manifest in their consciousness, but for me, it's a belief, so it comes from the subconscious. But that's what I'm being told. is it is a solely subconscious thing, but they're still thoughts, even though I don't consciously hear them. And I know some of you might be hearing this and going, well, why isn't Jesus just taking away this if you're asking the idol to be taken away? But when it comes to something that you have your belief in, if something is an idol, you have to find a way to kill the belief in it in its entirety. While I have heard that some people have some rather miraculous instant conversion stories when they turn to Jesus, for a vast majority of people and for people who have been walking in the faith for a while, the refinement process is gradual. Oftentimes, it's you do something, you get convicted, you get instructions on what you should have done, how to move forward, but you're still going to stumble most of the time, if not in the same way, in another way. You'll get convicted again, and the process repeats over and over again. It's like having a constant therapist in your conscience, diagnosing what the issue is and giving you steps to move forward, and then it is on you to apply that advice in the future. Anyway, after this rather strict and harsh lesson from my spiritual father, that night I actually got an email for a callback, which was something I was not willing to believe when I was told that. Again, I walked off while reading for a character. But what's very funny is when callbacks happened, they didn't actually call anyone back for that character because, as it turns out, I was the only one that really fit the role. So I am happy to announce that I'm going to be playing Wesselton in a local community theater, and I'm really excited for that. The Duke of Wesselton is one of my favorite more minor antagonists in Disney because he's kind of comic relief, and also in the Broadway version of the musical, Wesselton has more of a story arc, whereas in the film Frozen, he is just the embodiment of fear and a gag character who doesn't have any sort of redemption. But in the musical version, there's an actual story arc with him, and I think it is a very good first role for me to be in because even though he is in a lot of scenes, the role also isn't so large that it would be overwhelming. Though I will say there is a part of me that is slightly disappointed because I kind of wanted to be in the ensemble, and the sad part about Wesselton is because he's in a lot of scenes, he can't really be in most of the ensemble songs. But at the same time, I also get to fulfill my dream of being cast as an old man. I'm so excited and so fearful. But in all seriousness, all the guys that tried out were very tall, and then both the people who were cast as Anna and Elsa are also very tall. So me being cast in the role of Wesselton was just perfect for the situation, because in the musical, there is even a comment about his very short stature, which wouldn't work if any of the other guys were cast for him. I also kind of figured that I would get cast as one of the lesser male characters because in the audition sheet it mentioned that you had to be feminine presenting for the female roles, and even though I could have gone in and wore a dress and stuff, it's just not my style in general. So I kind of figured that they were going to consider me for a male role just because of how I look. But I'm really excited. I wanted to share this video with you guys because not only is this a major stepping stone in my life towards not only my self-healing, but also doing something that I've always wanted to do. I feel like the lesson that I did learn after the audition was large enough that I wanted to share it with everyone. Because regardless of what your own individual beliefs are, at the end of the day, it's these same negative thoughts and core beliefs that plague everyone, that even if you don't agree with how I interpret the things that I've heard, I still feel led to share these lessons because they apply to everyone. You may not agree with the fact that these disembodied thoughts can become idols, but for me, that's the best way to understand the situation and to take it seriously rather than mope around in misery about, oh, woe is me, why does nothing ever change? Because change doesn't happen unless you believe in change. This was a very long and hard lesson for me to learn because I dealt with it at work for years. There was no amount of patience or waiting that was going to change that. The final outcome was I had to confront them point blank and explain that if they still wanted me around, they would have to change. No amount of words of appreciation would change the fact that work was neglecting me. They appreciated me, but their actions never showed it. But at the same time, I also have had to change my mentality about my singing voice and a lot of aspects of my life because there is comfort in the familiar, in what you already know. Actually, I will share one other thing before I go, and there was this weird supernatural thing that happened where my phone started typing by itself while I was washing my hands in the bathroom, and I caught it out of the corner of my eye, and it stopped typing about 2 seconds after I noticed, and what it wrote was similar to the thoughts I was having about going back into that section and adding something into the paragraph, but also not properly translated correctly. And it was, you don't think for me, for I don't even think for myself, for you know the synonymous. And when I ended up typing that into Google, I ended up accidentally forgetting the last letter because I typed that whole sentence in there. And what popped up was an AI message that said, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. But if I had typed in the last letter without forgetting it, that AI message never would have popped up. It was the weirdest experience in my life because not only did I see a supernatural phenomenon with my phone physically typing by itself with no external aid, it is very possible that the auto select button for some reason on a touch screen was glitching out, and that's what was going on, and it was just weirdly on point to the thoughts that were in my mind. But it does not explain the fact that the AI message on Google said that, because no, I said to whatever was possessing the autocorrect in my phone that it is better no devil at all. I am not going to be fooled into complacency. That is the one thing that I have been trying to conquer for years, and every single time I make a step forward, something tries to knock me down again. It's the same mentality that a lot of us have gotten into with voting for political candidates, where people go, it's the lesser of two evils. No, let's just stop encouraging evil in general. If this is the entire mentality that you say is never going to change, then it's never going to change unless you make a conscious effort to change it. The audacity of my phone, whether that be a spirit literally typing on my phone or just some weird coincidence with my auto select glitching out, the audacity for it to type that, and then the Google AI, which I don't even use the AI, it's just what popped up top on the Google search, to try to convince me that it's better to remain complacent than to accept change, is ridiculous when I had only just gotten out of that situation at work. To be told, oh, go back to that, it's better to stay in what you know with that horrible shift than to go into the unknown because who knows what could happen. Trying to convince me to be fearful. The audacity. It doesn't matter whether it was some weird glitch in my phone or not. In that moment, it was insulting. I know the idiom is used to describe, honestly, what has been a lifelong philosophy for myself, where it's better to accept something that is undesirable in the moment than to possibly end up in a worse situation. But in the context of my phone being allegedly possessed, I think you can see why I may have taken that in a bit of an eccentric context. My new understanding that I will keep learning about as I continue to move forward is it is better to strive for change and a better life than it is to stay in something that is miserable, because staying in misery is a choice. There is no point of long suffering if the endeavor is founded on a lie to begin with. I often tell people that honesty and truth are not the same thing. Honesty is how we humble ourselves. But if you do not have humility in your honesty, there is no truth in you. Because if you believe in a lie, then you're going to be honest when you talk about that lie. Honesty is subjective and can be molded to change, but truth is concrete and unchanging. I was honest when I said that I would be happy for people when they would get the schedule change, even though it sucked for me. But the reality was, the truth of the matter was, I was hurting, and I kept ignoring the pain, trying to see a greater good with a bit of a savior complex almost, that I was remaining in misery out of my own choice, because I didn't want to confront management in a rather harsh way, because I'm just not that type of person. I don't like being that type of person. While the singing trauma is more difficult to put into words what the core lie was that was plaguing me, I do think this principle still applies with the honesty versus truth, where honestly I felt like I was a bad singer and I couldn't perform because the results kept showing that no one wanted me, and if I tried to sing in front of people, nerves would get in the way. But the truth of the matter seems to be that there was a core belief of perfectionism that was fearing failure, and that failure would manifest itself before I even had a chance. And then in that other example of having to confront a mental image of me being incapable to form close friendships because I was afraid to lose people, because the track record shows time and time again that I care about others, but no one ever puts in the effort towards me. It's always selfishly motivated. But at the same time, there was also this selfish thought of, I'm too afraid to open myself up because the result never changes. And when you have that mentality in your head, even if you don't realize it, the result is never going to change. You are what you think, and you are what you believe. But just because you are what you think and you are what you believe, it does not mean that that is the truth of the matter. So I will do a follow-up video on this sometime in March after we've done the show, so I can recount my experience with actually performing on stage with a speaking role, and how I am able to overcome these newfound discoveries about myself and my brain, how I apply that, what will work, what doesn't work, and I'm just really excited to do videos more in this format in the future. If you couldn't tell, none of this is scripted, and that's been part of my problem in the past. I would try to script videos on a subject, and then I'd gain more knowledge on it, and the script would become outdated, and then I'd try to write another one, and then it would become outdated again, which again, it just like the theme of this video, that perfectionism, fear of failure, wanting to cross my T's and dot my I. I need to make sure that everything makes sense and is coherent, so I've decided to let go of that control and just let my thoughts flow. And while it is still difficult adjusting to speaking in this manner, I keep recording things, I keep deleting them, and then I keep trying different angles to talk about something. I am getting a lot better at allowing my thoughts to flow like this. And since I do have a lot of stories and a lot of ideas and things I'd like to talk about, we should be seeing more videos in this format in the future. The biggest hurdle right now is I really want to put actual speed paints into the video. I know this sounds extremely cheesy, but I could use prayers for my drawing hand that I can actually keep consistently drawing so I can get Expedition Uncharted and Destination Unknown out there. The hand impairment is ridiculous, and again, every time I go in to get it checked out, they don't discover anything, and it makes me feel like I'm going crazy having this very real pain. Even the time where I thought I broke my hand a couple months ago when I was pacing and I slammed the back of my hand accidentally against the doorknob, there was nothing there. There was a bruise, but there was nothing that indicated any further injury. And this was a few months ago, so my hand was x-rayed back then to look at that. My hand looks perfectly fine on the surface, but there is something that is wrong and extremely debilitating that keeps manifesting. And I just want to draw, and I can't. So for now, this is the only way I can keep making content. But I still want it to be enjoyable. I don't want to go to a full-on podcast format. I want to keep this channel art and animation focused, and I don't mean to be shifting my content towards more of like life lessons with a spiritual twist onto it. It's just I want to get back onto YouTube, but for now this is what I can do to keep content flowing and to keep myself motivated to do something without falling into the trap of, again, complacency. The complacency to be lazy. I'm trying to avoid that. But for now, this sort of style is what you'll have to bear with. I understand if you don't want to stick around because this isn't what most of you would have subscribed for. But to those of you who want to continue on this journey with me as I talk more about my self-healing and the things I am hearing and led to share with everyone, I'll see you guys around. So, to conclude the video, I will explain what this speed paint is. It's some concept art of Lily's group before the events of Destination Unknown. When I started drawing this, I was originally going to do the scene I mentioned in the video where Los is being laughed at by Lily because, again, it is one of my favorite scenes. You know, now that I'm thinking out loud, what scene am I looking forward to that doesn't involve Lily, and specifically Lily being a spirit? I feel so bad, but when I talk to a lot of my friends about Lily, I'm like, yeah, Lily is far more useful to me when she is dead than when she is the prophet in Mediterranean. And it sounds so bad when I say it that way, but I would like to direct you to videos on my channel in which Lily appears. I think there's only one outside of Destination Unknown itself where she is alive. And that was a very early map part of Akita fighting with Aphliana, and it's a very crude old design of Lily before she had the Hyeta tails on her eyebrows. But that was from an even earlier version of Destination Unknown's script in which Aphliana physically displayed the powers within her staff to Akita. And now that just, I don't know, episode 1's kind of boring. She does that in episode 2 now and traps acetylene in ice, but it's not the same. Especially since back then Aphliana was the guardian of air, but now she's the guardian of ice. And the reason I did that is when I was distributing the elements to the different characters, I wanted to have Aphliana's element match the theme that was her character. And her theme is selflessness versus selfishness. What does it take to be a noble ruler to your land? So my thought process with Aphliana was to do something associated with temperature for her. The colder a ruler is, the more the kingdom suffers, whereas the more warm-hearted a ruler is, the more prosperous it will be. And since this is a bit of a concept art explanation, I'll explain Aphliana's staff that holds the element. She states in Destination Unknown that she usually just uses it to heal people. She doesn't really believe in using the power because she believes it belongs to the kingdom of Mediterranea, and for her to use it outside of what is necessary to serve others, she's afraid of what it might do to her. Oddly enough, a very fun fact, the line in Destination Unknown where Akita says, "Some ruler you are," a lot of that was improv by Brim. And when I look back on it now, I feel like maybe I shouldn't have included it, but I thought the line was so good, I wanted to keep it in there. But anyway, I'll explain more about Aphliana in a later video that I have planned. Instead, I want to focus on Lily and Kair at the forefront of the drawing. While I was drawing this, I was reminded of some of the earlier versions of the script, because the prologue for Destination Unknown, which I ended up scrapping, had a few different ideas on what the starting scene would be. The most common one was Artixi, Polaris, and a character I've never drawn before, Blue, fighting off the crypt. But the second most common prologue was the attack on Medora Kingdom. And in the one that reminded me of Kair, I'm thinking of the version in which Mendeleev was disguised as Lily, and they confused the doppelganger for Lily, but Kair ended up figuring out it wasn't Lily due to how Lily was acting. So when they do finally encounter Lily in the underground tunnels, they're very distrusting because of what they just went through. So Kair does a series of questioning where it just basic random facts, and the last thing he says was, "The name of your first crush." And Lily goes, "Wait, what?" And Kair goes, "Me!" And does this happy-go-lucky circle thing, and Lily stares at him and gives an immediate "you're delusional" response in the most annoyed tone. And Kair falls to the ground and goes, "Yeah, it's her." Their entire dynamic is they are two of the closest people to Queen Aphliana, but they are also best friends, and I always draw them together, but they also have this very joking relationship with each other that no one but themselves understand. But even though that version of the script has long since been scrapped, I still get a laugh out of it sometimes, because the joke is that Lily and Lanera are a couple. So Lanera smacks him to the ground after he says that, because it's not true. It's a way Kair is just getting under Lanera's skin. We know from Lily's reaction Kair is being a goof, but Kair is actually being very intelligent with it by getting straight to the point of how can we get Lily's personality to shine, because the doppelganger likely wouldn't be able to mimic that, which they were right. But anyway, I don't think I've ever talked about Lanera on my channel before, so let's talk about her. I've brought her up on Patreon before in a number of character fact cards, but Lanera is a healer. She is someone who is close to Queen Aphliana, but her mother is the one in the, closest position, and her story is kind of tragic. Her parents came to Mediterranea seeking refugee from a conflict that happened in Archielo. Now, later in the story, Archaeans get a bad rep for protesting the Mediterranean monarchy, who ends up under the authority of Aphliana's tyrannical daughter. But you want to know a very funny fact about that? I don't think Aphliana had a kid in the natural way in all this time that she has existed, because she's existed since basically the beginning. I've never gave her a love interest, yet she has a child. Although, if you want to go really early into the story. She had 2 children, Shizuru and Mizuru, but Shizuru is the tyrannical one in Expedition Uncharted that we hear about. But anyway, Lanera went from serving Aphliana to serving Shizuru, but eventually she ends up becoming the ruler of Mediterania, because that is who she is now. If you didn't know, Lanera is the queen of Mediterania in Expedition Uncharted. How she got there, though, I'll leave that as a mystery for now. But I have her peering in from the hallway behind Aphliana because I just think it's fitting to symbolize that she's always there, even though on the surface level of Destination Unknown, she almost seems like a forgotten character. But I low-key just think she's eyeing Kair in jealousy. Oh, now I'm just thinking, I'm like, imagine that Lanera tries to have a date with Lily, but Kair just keeps showing up and they just don't understand. I think Kair would be the overprotective friend on a first date who just says, ignore me, act like I'm not here, but is like that annoying presence people can't ignore or would insert himself into the conversation. You know what? If you've made it this far into this video, give me a prompt for Kair. Just anything. Give me a word, a scene, a setting, a situation. Let's give my tiny Thunderhawk some spotlight. Anyway, long story short, it's just some concept art from before Destination Unknown. Thank you for sticking around if you stuck around for the random lore bits and pieces that I gave out. There will be more videos solely dedicated to lore in the near future. But until then, thank you for watching and bye!